Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and today we're going to be switching a bit out of our conversation on politics, elections, the economy, to talk about something that, if you're a regular listener, you've heard me touch on this and talk to some people about this as well, is related to Pakistan's education sector. And one of the things, especially when we talk about the technology sector or bringing manufacturing to Pakistan, one thing I often flag, which for those of you who are not aware, is that Pakistan right now is the only country after Afghanistan in the SAARC countries or in the countries in Pakistan's region that has a youth literacy rate of under 90%. And in fact, if you take out sort of men among those youth, young women in Pakistan, almost roughly 4 out of 10 of them are still illiterate. So there is an education crisis. And if we talk about how politics is going to evolve, how the economy is going to evolve, how sustainable growth is going to be achieved, I think none of those things are possible without solving for this huge education crisis in the country. So I figured today we'll focus on that topic and hear from somebody who's been working in the education sector quite a lot, having a great impact, and running an organization that I sort of followed over the years and wanted to learn more about as well. So joining me is Khadija Shahper Bakhtiar, who is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Teach for Pakistan, a national nonprofit organization that is nurturing leadership to end educational inequity in the country. It provides university graduates an opportunity to support and teach for 2 years in low income communities. This is where the big gap in terms of education access is. They have a fellowship program. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the organization's vision and mission, and Khadija's own views from her experience in the education sector about what goes wrong. I think there is a myth among quite a lot of Pakistanis to this day that Pakistan does not spend a lot, and this is simply a spending problem. But we have research actually that shows that spending is going up and has gone up. And yes, there is a spending problem, but there is a efficiency of resource problem as well, and we'll touch on that. And maybe if I'm wrong, I would love Khatija's thoughts on this. So first of all, welcome to the podcast, Khatija, and thank you for taking out the time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Uzair. I've been a fan and been following you and your work for a while, and so really, really happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, as I was telling you before the recording, these are some of the more exciting and interesting conversations I find at a personal level. So I'm really happy that we have you here with us, and maybe to help us understand and help the audience understand the genesis of Teach for Pakistan and how and why did it come about and what the story was. And more importantly, also like what is the overall mission and footprint of the organization right now?
Bilkul, happy to do that. And so, what feels like 100 years ago, I graduated as a young person from LUMS. I got my bachelor's, and I graduated having studied a lot of political science and economics and philosophy, and with my head full of ideas of how the world needs changing, and I'm going to be one of the people who go out and change it. And graduating realized very fast that इतनी opportunities हमारे मुल्क में नहीं exist करती जो structured opportunities हैं for young people who are trying to find an alternative path, doing something that is not perhaps very mainstream. And there are very good established mechanisms for people to build a career in the corporate sector, even build a career in mainstream development work. But if you're trying to really seek out, what do you care about? Where will I get a lot of hands-on learning? Where will I have the support to try and experiment, have room to fail, and come out of whatever that first experience is post university, a better professional and a clearer and more committed human being. There's very few opportunities like that in Pakistan. So I got lucky. I worked for a year with a small nonprofit based here in Islamabad. It's called Rosin. It works on women and children's issues, particularly their protection against violence, sexual violence, and like holistic education, particularly life skills education things. And so that was kind of my first exposure in many ways to thinking more deeply about our children and what are their needs. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to get a scholarship to go to the US and get a master's degree. So I landed up in Berkeley. I was pursuing my master's in public policy. And that I think is where I stumbled upon an idea that helped me connect many of these dots that I had been carrying with me and and as my thinking had been evolving. And that was that I met a lot of people in my class who had done this program called Teach for America. And as I thought more about what they were saying when we were sitting in class discussions, I was in a very immature undergrad mindset still, and everything was still very much about me. And what I wanted out of my grad school more than anything else was a thappa, to be honest, that would allow me to come back and build a prestigious career for myself.
Well, Berkeley is
And
a
I had
great place to get the great place to get the thappa from. So yeah.
yeah, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल एंड सो बट मेरे साथ ये जो सारे और यंग लोग हैं जिन्होंने ये प्रोग्राम किया हुआ है वो निहायत ही कमिटेड ड्रिवन थोड़ा सा मुझे लगा कि मतलब क्रेजी कमिटेड है एंड दे अंडरस्टूड सो वेल द रियलिटीज ऑफ not just their state or their country at like a high level by reading data, but they seem to know what makes people tick right in their communities, what holds them back, what are their barriers, and they seem to have a really clear vision for their own lives about what is the role that they want to play in moving their communities forward. So it seemed really invested, and they were all brilliant. So I found myself thinking, what is this program that kind of churns out these people? And as I learned more about it, I realized this is essentially what they do. They find the top talent in the country and they get them to commit initially to teaching for 2 years. Many people stay on in teaching for longer than 2 years, but many of them move on to doing many other interesting things within education or within the broader system that supports education and what happens for kids in that country. And Teach for America was like 30-35 साल पुराना program था, and so looking at their impact was huge, and I was very very moved. And I learned more about the people who were running it, and I found it. I was very inspired. So that got me thinking कि पाकिस्तान में इस तरह का प्रोग्राम एग्जिस्ट करना चाहिए. पहली मेरी सोच, I will have to admit, बहुत selfish थी. And it came out of being a young person who wanted to have done something like this. I don't know if I had gotten accepted to teach for Pakistan because program बहुत selective हो गया है, so शायद मैं reject हो जाती है अगर ये program exist करता है at the time. But I would have certainly applied and tried to get this opportunity. And so I remember thinking this program needs to exist for young people like me, And as I came back to Pakistan and started to try and build this out and learn more about education, I'd gone to a private school myself, a good private school, and had a ton of opportunity and privilege in my life. And as I started to explore more what goes wrong in education at the level of our low cost private schools or our government schools, why aren't we able to take these incredibly brilliant kids who have a ton of potential and give them the opportunity and the support that all of us deserve, right? All our kids deserve. I started to get more and more deeply involved and connected to this program. So that's the genesis. I came back and I said, I want to try and see if there's potential to build out Teach for Pakistan. बहुत सारे दफ्तरों में बहुत सारे लोग मुझ पे बहुत हंसे, गवर्नमेंट में भी, कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर में भी, because people said ये कोई करेगा नहीं,
And
कोई
what
young
year were you going to these offices and asking the babus to approve your brilliant idea?
This is 2011 when I came back from grad school. And I went, yeah, and I'm very green, of course. I'm 26 years old. I don't really have much experience. So maybe in some ways they were right. They were right to write me off. But I think there was a lot of skepticism more than about me and my ability to do this. I think there was lots of skepticism कि कोई young इंसान जिसने 4 साल की डिग्री हासिल की है एक recognized public या private university से, वो आके एक पीले स्कूल में नहीं पढ़ाएगा. So ये आपका प्रोग्राम चलेगा ही नहीं. It will never get off the ground. In fact, I remember one person who I will not name, a corporate giant in the country, told me once that you're relying on a value to run this program. You're relying on a value that you're trying to create at the same time, which is for young people to give back, and that doesn't exist right now. So,
Which, if I
but I
may
think what we
interrupt,
found was
that's a very important thing you said, and I wanted to interrupt here because, for lack of a better term, I would say that that's a view, very mainstream view among many older Pakistanis, particularly Pakistani men in particular. But that's a BS view, and I'll sort of give an anecdotal example of my own experience when the earthquakes in Kashmir happened. I was in high school at that time. I forget the exact year, but it's a memory in my mind about how in Karachi, so many of us who are 16, 18, 19, 22 year olds would go to the Air Force base near Shara Faisal and spend a lot of time simply helping out in whatever was needed. You want me to pack boxes, I will do that. You want me to move boxes, I will do that. You want me to sort things out, I will do that. And this was all young people. and this dismissive attitude that the young people don't want to give back and are very selfish in Pakistan. It is a view is in Western countries as well. I've had the experience in the United States. It is a view, but not as strong of a view. In fact, you're encouraged as a young person to spend your youth in giving back because you have that energy and that ability. But in Pakistan, it's actually at a much higher level. And I'm sorry, but that's a BS view to hold about that young people don't want to give back to their country and society.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right. And I think what we found in our experience is exactly true. We're now recruiting the 11th cohort. We place a cohort of fellows every year in schools. These are the teachers who teach for 2 years. This is a fellowship program, so we call them fellows. And year on year, we get thousands of applications for a few spots. In our first year, when we were launching and we had done very little marketing and raising awareness about what this opportunity is, we were just getting started. And then we had 30 spots open for the fellowship, and we got 660 applications for that in year one from university students and young professionals all over the country.
So what I calculate is basically about a 5 to 6% acceptance rate. 30 people out of 600 applicants coming into the program, which, if I have my broad math in my head correct, is a much lower acceptance rate than perhaps the institution you went to, which is Berkeley itself. So a lot of interest.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about that in that particular comparison, but yes, it is a very selective program, and we can, when we talk about the fellowship in more detail, I can tell you a little bit more about why it is structured the way that it is, and why we believe that selectivity is important. But yeah, so I think, I mean, just that's been the kind of, I think from that first year when we got this number of applications, this kind of interest from young people across the country, it told us that this program can work. And then the first cohort came in, and then they started teaching, and it's just 30 people, but you look at the impact that they started to have in schools, and it was dramatic. They so what we our data has found is that the kids that we teach, they're 4 or 5 years behind their learning level in every subject that we're teaching them when fellows start with them. जिसका मतलब है कि जो बच्चा क्लास 5वीं जमात में बैठा है, उसकी अंग्रेजी या उर्दू या रियाजी की स्किल वो भी नहीं है जो क्लास 1 के बच्चे की होनी चाहिए, राइट? तो ये एकेडमिक गैप है जिसके साथ हम डील कर रहे हैं। जो बच्चे की बाकी सोशल इमोशनल डेवलपमेंट है, वो तो उसका तो बिल्कुल ही कोई हाल नहीं है, ना उसकी कोई कॉन्वर्सेशन होती है, ना उसके पास हमारे पास कोई नेशन वाइड डेटा है। जो बच्चे की अपनी विजन क्या है, उसकी अपनी जिंदगी के लिए कोई ख्वाब देख सकता है, अपने अपने बारे में क्या बिलीव्स होल्ड करता है, कि वो क्या इंसान है, वो किसी से कितना काबिल है, वो बाकी सबसे कितना कमतर है, राइट? वो सारे सारे प्रॉब्लम्स के साथ हम बच्चों के साथ जब काम शुरू करते हैं, तो दैट्स व्हाट वी फाइंड। एंड 2 सालों में तकरीबन 4.5 साल से ऑन एवरेज एक फेलो की क्लासरूम में बच्चा जो है वो प्रोग्रेस करता है इन दैट पर्टिकुलर सब्जेक्ट दैट द फेलो इज टीचिंग देम। एंड सो दैट्स अ मैसिव मैसिव जंप, राइट? एंड बहुत सारी जो बाकी हम जिन स्ट्रेंथ्स की बात कर रहे हैं डेवलप करने की बच्चों के अंदर, वो हमारा फोकस है बच्चे की अपनी लीडरशिप एबिलिटी के ऊपर काम करने की। एंड सो द फैक्ट व्हेन वी स्टार्टेड टू सी that kind of data coming out of classrooms, we said, this is crazy. This program, it was beyond what I had expected myself, because मैंने इससे पहले कभी टीचर्स के साथ काम नहीं किया था, कभी तालीम के शोबे के अंदर ग्रासरूट लेवल पर काम नहीं किया था। एंड सो दिस काइंड ऑफ ब्लू मी अवे। एंड सो देन वी सेड कि अच्छा ठीक है, 4 साल हमने उसको रन किया एज अ पायलट, and we said, if these are the results that we're getting, then we need to kind of take this outside of a pilot stage and launch it as a separate entity, as a full-fledged organization that has the ability to grow to scale, and that can get the support of many provincial governments, many businesses, many university partners. Lots of people need to get involved to really kind of blow this work up, because we know it has that potential now. And so 2017 में हमने पायलट को हमने रैप अप किया 2015 में, एंड देन 2017 में हमने इस्लामाबाद में इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को रजिस्टर किया सेपरेट एंटिटी। We have a wonderful board of directors that's been with us since we founded the program. जो हमारे पायलट के अलमनाई थे, वो अब इस प्रोग्राम को चलाते हैं। इसकी सारी जो थिंकिंग है कि कौन आएगा इस प्रोग्राम में, उनको हम कैसे डेवलप करेंगे, जब वो अलमनाई बन जाएंगे तो वो क्या काम करेंगे, बच्चों के लिए हमारी क्या विजन है, उनको टेस्ट कैसे करते हैं, ये जो सारा एक्चुअल काम है वो अब इस प्रोग्राम के ही अलमनाई लीड करते हैं, विच इज व्हाई उसकी क्वालिटी इतनी ड्रामेटिकली इंप्रूव हो गई है since when I was leading that work, because these people of course are much more capable. So that's kind of a little bit of the story of Teach for Pakistan. Now we work in partnership here in Islamabad with the Federal Directorate of Education and the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training. We feel like the working with government is extremely important because the government schools, of course, are extremely underserved, particularly जो हमारे rural communities में या urban slums में जो government के schools हैं. And so उनमें हमें बेहतर quality की teaching resources देनी है, बहुत ज़रूरी है वो. But then the other thing is that we want to be able to work closely with government so that we can start to share what we are learning about how do you do this well, right? And how do you create change at the level of a classroom and a school. And I think that's what's coming out of our government partnership here in Islamabad, which has been incredible. And we're now just launching. We're going back to Karachi, which was our home, which was where we got started. So we're just launching our Sindh program now. इस साल की जो recruitment campaign है वो इस्लामाबाद और कराची दोनों के लिए है. So fellows will be teaching in both these cities starting this August.
That's amazing. So, my follow-up on this is you sort of had a pilot phase, you're scaling it into different cities and sort of going beyond the federal partnership. But help me understand how and what is the model through which you achieve this success of filling this huge gap, right? Again, as I was saying in my introduction, still a country, everyone else is above 90%. Afghanistan is the outlier, but Afghanistan has had 40 years of war. And in fact, if you look at the charts of their growth trajectory pre the fall of Kabul and the return of the Afghan Taliban, there was pretty clear that in the 15, 20 years of sort of the American presence in Kabul, one of the very positive things out of that experience was that education levels were actually catching up very quickly, especially for young girls. And if you sort of project that onwards, holding the fact that Taliban would not have returned, my estimate was that in a few years, Afghanistan would probably have had a higher rate of youth literacy than Pakistan, given the investments that were being made over there at that time. In Pakistan, we have this gap, right? And again, on that level, as you rightfully said, the रियाजी का जो gap है वो इतना बड़ा होता है speaking का, और ये जो हमारे पास data है ये बिल्कुल bare minimum level of literacy को judge करता है कि आप अपनी ज़बान में लिख 2 सेंटेंस लिख सकते हैं या उनको समझ सकते हैं. That's a very low bar of literacy, quote unquote. तो उसके आगे का तो अल्लाह ही मालिक है एक तरह से. So when you send the fellows in and engage with these children, what are the things that the fellows do? What is the model of teaching that allows them to so quickly catch up and really embrace their full potential that has been left out to rust essentially prior to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'll tell you a little bit about the why of the core fellowship program first, and then I think that'll help build to
Sure.
कि उसके अंदर क्या करते हैं लोग. So हमारे जहन में आइडिया एग्जैक्टली यही है. मैं सोचूं कि टीचर पाकिस्तान एग्जिस्ट क्यों करता है, उसकी मेन कंट्रीब्यूशन क्या है. तो द आइडिया इज नॉट दैट वी आर गोइंग टू be able to place an excellent teacher in every school by doing the Teach for Pakistan fellowship model. That's not the approach, even though that is one way, but that's not our approach. Our core belief is कि अगर आपने एजुकेशन को सिस्टम के लेवल के ऊपर बदलना है, क्योंकि बहुत सारे नॉन प्रॉफिट बहुत सारा अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं, पीसमील एफर्ट्स गवर्नमेंट भी करती है, एक प्रोजेक्ट एट अ टाइम उठा के उसको उस चीज में बेहतरी लाने की कोशिश, जैसे पिछले सालों में करिकुलम के ऊपर बहुत सारा काम हुआ. मगर हमारा कोर बिलीफ ये है कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम के अंदर इतने सारे मसाइल हैं और बच्चों को क्या किस चीज की जरूरत है उसमें एजुकेशन के बाहर भी बहुत सारे मसाइल हैं, राइट, विच इज अबाउट न्यूट्रिशन और अबाउट हेल्थ और अबाउट एक्सेस टू टेक्नोलॉजी, राइट, ऑल ऑफ दीज अदर थिंग्स. सो अगर हमने वो सिस्टम्स को ठीक करना है जो कि बच्चों को या अपॉर्चुनिटी प्रोवाइड करते हैं या बच्चों के लिए अपॉर्चुनिटी रोकते हैं, तो आपको बहुत सारे लोग चाहिए जिनकी काबिलियत भी है और जिनकी एक विजन भी है और जो इमोशनली इस काम से कनेक्टेड भी हैं, जो एक ही विजन के साथ इन सब मसलों के ऊपर एक साथ काम करेंगे, राइट. ये पीसमील 3 to 5 year प्रोजेक्ट बेस्ड अप्रोचेस हमारे जहन में ये चलेंगी नहीं, ये सस्टेनेबल नहीं है, राइट. And so I think that's the core belief with which we're working, that if you want to solve all of these many pieces of the puzzle that are holding back education and quality and improvement in this country, then you need to create a pipeline of leaders meaning people who have the potential to drive change, right? And that's a key input that you need. And Teach for Pakistan sees itself as being able to generate that input, because वो लोग कहाँ से आएंगे, right? अब ये बात जब हम अगर कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर के एग्जांपल में सोचें तो इतना इसके ऊपर इतनी किताबें लिखी गई हैं, इतना डिस्कोर्स है इस सवाल के अराउंड के चेंज मैनेजमेंट के अंदर लीडरशिप का बहुत बड़ा रोल है. कौन इंसान कौन है जो ड्राइव कर रहा है उस चेंज मैनेजमेंट को, बल्कि कौन से इंसान हैं जो मिलके ड्राइव करते हैं चेंज मैनेजमेंट के प्रोसेसेस को. तो वो चीजें हमें और सिस्टम्स में हमें समझ में आती हैं, बट जब हम एजुकेशन की डेवलपमेंट की बात करते हैं, इंप्रूवमेंट की बात करते हैं, तो समहाउ हम सारी जो इनपुट चाहते हैं वो सिर्फ टेक्निकल है। हम सिर्फ बात करते हैं कि पैसा कहाँ से आएगा चेंज के लिए, जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट है, राइट, बट वो एक इनपुट है, राइट। या हम बात करते हैं कि भाई एक पॉलिसी कोई कंसल्टेंट हमें लिख के दे जाए, वो, बट वो पॉलिसी किस तरह चलेगी, कैसे अडॉप्ट होगी, कौन चलाएगा, राइट। So there's a human element to this problem that Teach for Pakistan is trying to solve for. We're trying to create this talent pipeline of people who can work, yes, at the school and community level, but at the level of the system. And we need a critical mass of this, right? And so I think in some ways we're just beginning, because you need many, many more of these capable people who together can drive our systems in a different direction. एंड सो वो नर्चर करने के लिए हमने डिजाइन किया इस फेलोशिप प्रोग्राम को, जो 2 सालों में हम इन लोगों को, जिनका हमें लगता है कि पोटेंशियल है कि ये इम्पैक्ट क्रिएट करेंगे स्कूल लेवल के ऊपर भी और सिस्टम लेवल के ऊपर भी, इनका लीडरशिप पोटेंशियल है, उनको हम 2 साल के लिए इस फेलोशिप प्रोग्राम के अंदर लेके आते हैं। ये वो लोग हैं जिन्होंने कभी जिंदगी में शायद टीचिंग को कंसिडर ना किया हो, वो या तालीम के शोबे में आना भी कंसिडर ना किया हो, राइट। ये वो लोग हैं जिनकी और अपॉर्चुनिटीज हैं और एक्सेस है, एंड दे डोंट वांट टू काइंड ऑफ गेट स्टक in jobs that don't challenge them, right? And so but you want
They don't want to start their career selling shampoos and biscuits and noodles, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think many of them have imagined that that's the path to success, right? They would rather do that because they feel like even that's more challenging than coming and teaching, right? Nobody who with any talent and potential in this country really wants to teach. And so I think, but our idea is always we need to get the most talented people actually to come and do this work. We need to get them to think about this as a potential opportunity, and come and teach for 2 years, learn first hand कि बच्चे को किस चीज की जरूरत है। सिस्टम अगर नहीं चलता, बाहर से बैठ के कहना बड़ा आसान है, ब्रोकन है, फेलियर है, सब टीचर्स लेजी हैं, सब प्रिंसिपल्स लेजी हैं, ये सच नहीं है ये बातें, राइट। सो सिस्टम के अंदर क्या गैप्स, व्हाट डजंट वर्क, राइट, एंड देन क्रिएट दैट चेंज एट द लेवल ऑफ दिस टाइनी माइक्रोकॉस्म ऑफ अ सिस्टम दैट यू आर वर्किंग इन नाउ. So work with the students, work with the other teachers in the school, work with the parents in the community to dramatically grow your current students' potential and learn के वाकई एक ambitious vision क्या है तालीम के लिए, जो आप बात कर रहे थे अभी। हम अपना गोल ही इतना लो सेट करते हैं, हम बेसिक लिटरेसी से ऊपर बात ही कभी नहीं करते, राइट। हालांकि जब अगर हम अपने बच्चे के बारे में सोचेंगे कि हम अपने बच्चे के लिए क्या चाहिए, तो वी विल नॉट से कि वो सिर्फ एक साइन बोर्ड पढ़ सके या ये बेसिक 2+2 रियाजी कर सके। वी वांट बिग थिंग्स फॉर देम, राइट। एंड सो आई थिंक दैट्स द थिंग दैट वी आर ड्राइविंग टुवर्ड्स इज in these 2 years give these young people an experience that through which they learn, and when they graduate this fellowship they are prepared to go into various pathways, various careers, go to various sectors and solve for Pakistan's biggest problems in education, whether that is working from within public policy, whether that's working from the non-profit space, whether that is doing grassroots work in partnership with communities, whether that's going and starting new things within ed tech or creating solutions that don't exist right now. But we need to create that. So that's how the fellowship program works essentially.
Okay, and so given that it's competitive, right? Let's say I'm listening to this conversation and I'm like, I want to apply to this next cohort. Tell us when the timelines, etc., are, and where people can go, and I'll put details in the description as well. But more importantly, it's a competitive program, and you need a specific type of person. I'm guessing this person has to be a go-getter. They should be able to be willing to work in environments that perhaps at times might be hostile because they're seen as an outsider and they need to problem solve. They need to be comfortable engaging with both young kids, but also adults who may be skeptical of them and their approach initially. कि ये आ गए अब हमें समझाएंगे, type of logic, right? So help us understand, like, what is the ideal fellows archetype in terms of this program and being successful and being an amazing contributor to this fellowship.
Yeah, Uzair, you seem to understand this so well. I wish we'd had the opportunity to recruit you. You would have made an excellent fellow. I feel like you understand the requirements so well of this program.
I would just say that understanding requirements and perhaps implementing them are two different things, but thank you for that compliment.
So yeah, it's a variety of things. I think exactly जैसे आप point out कर रहे हैं, core belief ये है कि अगर आप ऐसा इंसान ढूंढ रहे हैं जो सक्सेसफुल हो सकता है अपने स्कूल और क्लासरूम लेवल गोल्स में भी, जो हम उनके साथ शेयर करते हैं और जिस विजन की तरफ हम उनको इंस्पायर करते हैं, और बाद में विद इन द सिस्टम भी वो सक्सेसफुल हो सकता है इन बड़ी बड़ी मुश्किल मुश्किल मसाइल को हल करने में, राइट? सो एक यूनिक इंसान चाहिए आपको. यू आर लुकिंग फॉर पीपल हु आर डिफरेंट इन मेनी वेज. ये टैलेंट हम बिलीव करते हैं कि हमें हर जगह मिलता है, और क्योंकि हमें मिला है इतने सालों में, पब्लिक यूनिवर्सिटी कैंपस, प्राइवेट यूनिवर्सिटी कैंपस, वो लोग जो 5-5 6-6 साल काम करके वेरियस सेक्टर से करियर स्विच करना चाहते हैं, औरतों में भी है, मर्दों में भी है. सो वी फाइंड दैट अक्रॉस द बोर्ड. जो चीजें हम ढूंढ रहे हैं, इन एडिशन टू व्हाट यू सेड, आई थिंक क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग एबिलिटी, लॉजिकल कनेक्शंस बना सकें आप. क्योंकि वरना जो जो फ्रस्ट्रेशंस इंसान फेस करता है, वो फ्रस्ट्रेशंस को इंसान जस्टिफाई नहीं कर सकता जब तक आप देख ना सकें कि ये कहाँ से आ रही हैं, राइट? ये मसाइल जो मुझे अभी नजर आ रहे हैं, कहाँ से आ रहे हैं. अक्सर जब हम लोगों से डील करते हैं और लोग हमें मुश्किल लग रहे होते हैं, या वो चीज़ नहीं चाहते जो हम चाहते हैं, तो आई थिंक हम ब्लेम गेम शुरू कर देते हैं इस इंडिविजुअल को. बट यू वांट देम टू बी एबल टू सी कि ये इंसान जो आज सोच लेके खड़ा है आपके सामने, वो ऐसे क्यों सोचता है, राइट? उसके सिस्टेमिक फैक्टर्स है. सो एक क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग एक बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है, आई थिंक, हमारे लिए फैक्टर. दूसरी जो चीज़ है वो हमारे लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि ये जो इंसान है, ये इस्टेब्लिश कर सके कि ये वाकई ये जो काम है ये फॉर द राइट रीजंस करना चाहता है, ये वाकई ये काम फॉर द बेनिफिट एंड द वेल बीइंग ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स एंड फॉर देयर ओन ग्रोथ एंड लर्निंग करना चाहता है. आई थिंक हम एक चीज मैं देखती हूँ अक्सर के यंग लोग पर्टिकुलरली जो खुद हाई अचीवर्स होते हैं बहुत सारे फील्ड में, उनके लिए बड़ा मुश्किल होता है फेल करना. अच्छा, अब इस काम में बड़ा फेलियर है. ये हमें दुनिया भर की रिसर्च भी बताती है कि इन द फर्स्ट 3 years ऑफ टीचिंग, टीचर्स एक्चुअली सक, राइट? और द एवरेज टीचर सक्स बिकॉज मुश्किल काम है. टू डू इट वेल आपको वक्त लगता है. तो पहले साल में तो फेलोशिप में बहुत फेलियर है, राइट? यू आप बड़े बड़े ख्वाब के साथ आए होते हैं, आप देखते हैं बच्चा कितना पीछे है, और आप बड़ा जबरदस्त लेसन प्लान करके गए और वो डिजास्टर था उस दिन, राइट? सो यू कैन हैव टू पिक योरसेल्फ अप एंड टेक फीडबैक फ्रॉम योर कोच ऑल्सो, एंड डांट भी खा लो प्रिंसिपल की, एंड देन काइंड ऑफ मूव ऑन फ्रॉम दैट टू द नेक्स्ट स्टेज, राइट? सो आई थिंक that's very important. So I think that's the kind of combination of things that we look for. Application इस वक्त जो 2024 की फेलोशिप है, जो हमारी जुलाई में शुरू होगी, उसकी एप्लीकेशन की आखिरी डेडलाइन आ रही है 8 दिन में. It's the 31st of March. People can go to our website, which is www.iteachforpakistan.org, and they will be able to get a lot of information about fellowship है क्या, और कैसे अप्लाई करना है. और हमारे जो सोशल मीडिया पेजेस हैं वो भी अगर आप फॉलो करें तो वो बहुत रिच हैं, जो फेलोशिप के एक्सपीरियंस को बड़ा रियल कर देते हैं लोगों के लिए जो अप्लाई करना चाह रहे हैं.
Okay, awesome. So I will put those links as well, and for those who are interested, I want to pivot, Khadija, now this conversation towards the second half, where I wanted to get your sense on what is the broader systemic challenge here. One thing, and again, this was something I was loosely following in the elections debate in Pakistan. Although the debate wasn't really focused on really important issues, it was a lot of BS, but some conversations sort of got into education and what needs to happen to solve for this problem. Healthcare pe thodi si baat, but on education in particular, if I were to sort of imagine sitting around a dining table in Pakistan with my parents or extended family members, the argument would be हुकूमत जो है वो पैसे खर्च नहीं करती एजुकेशन पे, इसलिए पाकिस्तान का इतना बुरा हाल है, हमें पैसे ज़्यादा खर्च करने हैं. You may have also looked at this. Nadia Naviwala did a report a few years ago where she assessed the post 18th Amendment sort of shift in funding at the provincial level. And her argument was, yes, funding has been a challenge, and yes, there is a conversation to be had over here, but there's been a massive increase at the provincial level since the 18th Amendment on education. बट रिजल्ट हमें नज़र नहीं आ रहा उस खर्चे का अभी तक, और उसमें बड़ी इनएफिशिएंसी है. I would love your thoughts on like what ails the broader public education sector in Pakistan, or even the semi-private education sector in Pakistan, in terms of what's going on. Because again, काफ़ी सारे लोग will say youth dividend hai, we are a young country, therefore the future is great. But I'm like, well, if your youth is undereducated and malnourished and stunted, then it's not really a dividend to be proud of. But help us understand what is the challenges, what are the challenges here?
Yeah, and I mean, great question. And I think, and anybody who works in education has done their own thinking on this, and will probably give you a different response based on their vantage point. But I think everybody is in agreement that we know what is wrong with education in Pakistan. Now अब जब नए conferences और seminars होते हैं, तो मेरे ख्याल है हम सब लोग जो एक दूसरे को अच्छी तरह जानते भी हैं एजुकेशन में, जो इतने लोग काम करते हैं, at the back of the room लोग खड़े हो गए होते हैं, we know this, वो आगे बढ़ते हैं, right? And so I think it's kind of becoming conversations that we feel like we've engaged in for a long time, but the question is कि मसाइल का हमें पता है, मगर मसाइल क्यों persist करते हैं उसके बारे में शायद सोचने की जरूरत है कि हम इन मसाइल से आगे बढ़ क्यों नहीं पा रहे, right? Why aren't we being able to change them? आप बात कर रहे थे कि किस तरह चीजें डिक्लाइन कर रही हैं, एंड 2010 में हमने एजुकेशन इमरजेंसी डिक्लेयर की थी पाकिस्तान में, राइट? पहली दफा ये लफ्ज इस्तेमाल हुआ था एजुकेशन इमरजेंसी का, और 2010 के बाद से ये बहुत सारे ऐसे चेंजेस हुए हैं, बड़े बड़े मैसिव रिफॉर्म प्रोग्राम्स चले हैं अक्रॉस मेनी प्रोविंसेस, जिनके बड़े बड़े ऑब्जेक्टिव्स थे एनरोलमेंट बढ़ाने के भी और क्वालिटी को इम्प्रूव करने के भी, और डिस्पाइट दैट हमें डिक्लाइंस नजर आ रहे हैं। मैं अभी 2023 की जो असर की जो बड़ी एक सर्वे होता है, जो हाउस होल्ड सर्वे है, जो हमें लर्निंग के ऊपर डेटा देता है हर साल, वो मैं देख रही थी 2023 की, और वो 2019 में वो देख रहे थे कि भाई नेशनल लर्निंग रेट और 2019 से लेके अब तक 23 तक गिर ही रहा है, राइट? हम जो देख रहे हैं कि बच्चे सीख क्या रहे हैं क्लासरूम में, वो डिक्लाइन के ऊपर ही है, अभी तक हमें नजर आ रहा है। So why is nothing changing? So I think the expenditure piece, which is what many people commonly believe and hold to be true, the 2% of GDP का figure हम सारे बचपन से अपने सुनते आ रहे हैं, it's certainly true कि वो government allocations भी बढ़ी हैं towards expenditure. But I think the real question to ask is, what is that expenditure driven towards? Do we have clarity and an agreement on what are we going to spend on? What are the most prioritized areas? और फिर हम उन चीजों के ऊपर हम कॉम्प्रोमाइजेस ना करें और फ्लिप फ्लॉप ना करें फ्रॉम गवर्नमेंट टू गवर्नमेंट एंड प्रोजेक्ट टू प्रोजेक्ट, राइट? नया इंसान आके बेस्ड ऑन हिज और हर पर्टिकुलर थिंकिंग एजेंडा को 180 डिग्रीज शिफ्ट ना कर दे, उस एजेंडा के ऊपर हम कंसिस्टेंटली काम करें, बिकॉज जो हमारे मसाइल हैं वो 3 5 8 10 सालों में रिजॉल्व होने वाले नहीं है। सो आई थिंक वन ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट आई हैव बीन थिंकिंग अबाउट अ लॉट इज दैट we've been hearing and talking about a charter for the economy and a charter for for politics in Pakistan, right? But I think we need to think about a charter for education. We have to agree कि कौन सी चीजें हैं जो हम तालीम में अचीव करेंगे, कौन से सिस्टम के ऐसे पीसेस हैं जिनके ऊपर हम कमिट करेंगे अपने आप को कि ये हल होने हैं, नो मैटर व्हाट एल्स हैपेंस एंड डजंट हैपन इन दिस कंट्री, राइट? And then we stay focused on those no matter who it is that's running the show, right? So that's what I think has to happen. I think what we're missing is a very clear vision for what needs to change, and consistency then, right? And so आपने पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेस की बात की, एंड वी सीन दिस नाउ अगेन ईयर ऑन ईयर, पिछले 3 इलेक्शन से हम ये देख रहे हैं कि एजुकेशन के टॉपिक्स जो हैं वो एक ना बिग वे जो है वो हमारे मैनिफेस्टोज में शामिल होते हैं, उनके ऊपर कमिटमेंट्स होती हैं। What are they actually doing in terms of what's happening on ground, right? We are committing to, for instance, I will not name which province, but in the 2018 election campaign, उससे पहले वाला जो manifestos थे, we committed to completely digitizing education within a whole province, right? And investing in IT infrastructure. We can't even get kids to read and write. We are the nation with the top most out of school children in the entire world at this point in time, right? And we're saying कि हम अपने सारे schools को IT equip कर देंगे। मतलब think about what that means, right? What are we trying? We don't even have enough schools for kids. If we want to make a commitment, let's commit to, no matter, we will find the money, we will generate the resources to build the schools that we need, right? So I think that would be my thing, is getting really clear on a vision for what are the most important things. We are not going to deviate from them, and then following through with consistency, right? And that consistency has to start at the top, at your political leadership level, and then it has to filter down all the way through your bureaucracy. And then जो private sector actors हैं, जो भी तालीम की delivery में involved हैं, जो non-profit actors हैं, जो भी तालीम की delivery में involved हैं, we all have to be on the same page, that we're working towards the same thing together. So that is, if you ask me root cause क्या है, तो that is what I would name.
What's your view on sort of more devolution on the education question, right? And I ask this again, you spent time in the United States. I've lived here for a while. School boards are a very, political thing here. Elections होते हैं, उस पे लड़ाई झगड़े होते हैं, छुट्टियां किस वक्त देनी है, spring break कब होगी, these are all things that are debated at these school boards with parent-teacher associations and all of that. But what it tends to do, from my perspective, is that it inserts more competition, right? In terms of saying, okay, Montgomery County school system is much better than the DC public school system. Now, more people want to live in Montgomery County because DC schools suck. So parents start to go there. DC loses tax revenue. and therefore now there's pressure on DCPS to reform and catch up with Montgomery County next door, because otherwise the city gets hollowed out with these young adults and young parents who you want to attract in any city, right? And that competition sort of is good because it allows more experimentation to happen at a much faster rate, as opposed to getting sort of the state government's buy-in, because obviously that's a bigger, more bureaucratic institution. Do you think that part of the challenge in Pakistan also is that education, much like a lot of other things, including taxation, in my view, which is what I often talk about and know much better than education, um, has not been devolved in the way that inserts competition into the mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100,000%. I think the devolution is within education is a critical piece of the puzzle. I don't think that there is any getting away from it. And I think जो पंजाब में हो रहा है as a province, which is the largest and most complex, I guess, school system, is the biggest kind of greatest example to look at for why this is becoming so critical. So I think एक तो for reasons जो आप share कर रहे हैं कि devolution will encourage competition, मगर I think उससे एक से beyond अगर मैं जाऊँ कि हमने स्कूल के लेवल के ऊपर स्कूल प्रिंसिपल को कोई फैसला करने की ताकत नहीं दी जो मीनिंगफुल फैसला है। अगर अक्सर जब आप स्कूल प्रिंसिपल से बात करें तो वो अब खुद जब उनके स्कूल के अंदर टीचर शॉर्टेज होती है तो वो खुद कम्युनिटी से टीचर ढूंढने की जिम्मेदारी लेना चाहते हैं ताकि वो पोजीशन फिल कर सकें। अक्सर जो वो मैंने ये स्कूल में, एंड दिस इज वेरी कॉमन, इट्स नॉट इवन आई एम टॉकिंग नॉट इवन टॉकिंग अबाउट आइसोलेटेड एग्जांपल्स, कि वो एक स्कूल फंड से जो खुद वो एस्टैब्लिश करते हैं, पैसे माँ बाप से पूल करा के अपनी जेब से डाल के बाकी टीचर्स कलेक्ट में उसमें पैसे डाल के वो एक पोजीशन जो है वो, जो क्योंकि सैंक्शन पोजीशन नहीं है गवर्नमेंट की, वो टीचर हायर कर लेंगे, कम्युनिटी से उठा लेंगे और वो अच्छा रिसोर्स होगा जो उसी लेवल पे पढ़ाएगा जो आपके एवरेज गवर्नमेंट टीचर है, या शायद इन सम केसेस उससे बेहतर पढ़ाएगा, राइट? सो उसके पास एबिलिटी है और सेंस भी है कि उसको किस चीज की जरूरत है, आप उसको एम्पावर तो करें। उसने अगर एक कमरा बनवाना है नया स्कूल में तो वो 4 साल जो है वो नाक अपना रगड़ता रहे, ब्यूरोक्रेटिक लूपहोल्स में से जंप करता रहे, सिर्फ जस्ट टू गेट दैट अप्रूवल फॉर दैट वन रूम, राइट, दैट ही और शी हैज टू सेट अप इन देयर स्कूल्स। सो आई थिंक इट इज सो, इट्स अ लिटिल बिट इनसेन दैट हम अपने प्रिंसिपल्स को एम्पावर नहीं कर रहे टू मेक डिसीजंस दैट आर क्रिटिकल फॉर देयर स्कूल्स। and it comes down, I think, to how we view principals and teachers. I think it's in my reading of the system so far, I've found that there is a very deep belief and mindset problem. Like as a country, and when it comes to, I think, the majority of decision makers and influencers within education जो decide करते हैं कि क्या होगा education में, तालीम में policy क्या होगी और implement कैसे होगी, I think हम believe करते हैं कि teachers और principals are the problem to solve for. We don't think that they are the people who are going to help us solve the problem, right? And so there's very little trust. And you can always have really good, also logical reasons for why people say principals की capacity नहीं है। अच्छा तो develop करें ना, develop करें, right? वो तो आप ये भी कह सकते थे कि हम provinces को नहीं devolve कर सकते थे, कोई power को provinces में capacity नहीं है, तो वो तो मतलब it has to go hand in hand. So I think that the quality problem in education, I don't think that there is a way to solve it until we devolve to the school level. I also think that that would also empower the only people who can really hold schools accountable are the parents in the community. There's no other practical way to hold the school accountable for the results that students are getting, for what they're learning and what they're not learning, because they're in it day in and day out, right? And so आप हम कोई भी टॉप डाउन मॉनिटरिंग मैकेनिज्म बना लें, सबसे बेहतर मॉनिटरिंग मैकेनिज्म आपके वालिदैन है, क्योंकि उनको बेस्ट पता है कि क्या हो रहा है स्कूल के अंदर, राइट? एंड सो आई थिंक वो एम्पावरमेंट जो है वो मैं कहूंगी कि जितनी हम डिवॉल्व कर सकें स्कूल को चलाने की भी और स्कूल को अकाउंटेबल ठहराने की भी, उतना आई थिंक हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम में इम्प्रूवमेंट, क्वालिटी में पर्टिकुलरली बेहतरी लाने की हमारे पास गुंजाइश होगी।
Yeah, and I think the mindset problem is a huge one, right? In the sense that there's this, I don't know what the exact term for it is, like elitist or nanny state problem or whatever you want to call it, that जो लोग नीचे level पर, ground level पर हैं, they're bad faith actors, quote unquote, right? The principal is in it to make a quick buck, and therefore I need 10 processes to make sure he or she cannot add a room because they will make a quick buck off of it. Or if I give them the ability to hire the teacher that they need, they will be cronies about it, and therefore I need to have a whole stringent process. And as you said, the best check and balance on that is the community itself. and the parents. And the parents have a inherent stake, particularly at sort of the underprivileged level of the community, because this is the only way their child is going to have upward social mobility. They know it. This is not a, this is not a thing that parents who come from underprivileged backgrounds don't understand the power of education in ensuring upward mobility for their household. So empower them. But I think there's just this mentality that you can't trust the people who are in the midst of the action themselves, and it holds a lot of things back, including education. I want to ask my last question here, Khatija, is like, we've had elections, flawed, deeply flawed, however, whatever your political beliefs might be. I think if you're just an observer of the elections, you kind of can look at the data and basically go, we've regressed since 2013 and 2008. The democratic transition isn't going the way many of us anticipated, who are actually very realistic about what democratic transitions are about and how painful and long that journey might be. But setting that aside, what are things you would like to see, particularly provincial governments, do? I know you're saying you start working in Karachi as well. So what would your sort of top 2 or 3 things that you would like to see from the education ministers of the 4 provinces in the country?
Yeah, thank you. I think if you ask me, I would think of 4 things. My big picture push would be on looking at a real commitment to resolving the issues that hold the system back from improving the quality of education that is delivered to kids. So laser focus on what will improve learning outcomes. And to me, that means number one, we have to think about what happens with teachers and teaching. So the entire regime of teacher recruitment, development, management, governance, I think that needs to be contended with, honestly, because there are lots of big issues and issues of political economy within that realm. And I think for a long time we have circumvented those issues. And a lot of the policy development work that's happened in the past few years, I feel like, has also circumvented those issues. And I do understand that it's very difficult, but that is why we need our political leadership to be invested in solving for that, right? There are lots of things that are difficult. You're living in the US, I think, for instance, I saw how within the Obama administration, I saw what was happening on gun control. And I don't think that he was necessarily successful. He cared very much and he wanted to make a lot of progress, but he wasn't, right? So I understand that within stuff that's that hard and you have entrenched interests, it's difficult. We got to start somewhere, right? We got to take it on. So I think that's one thing, that the entire regime that's to do with teachers and teaching. I think that's beyond that. The second thing I would say is assessments. Again, it's an area where we have to look into why are we not being able to improve them. We know this is not something that is hidden. This is not something that has to be documented any further because it's been talked to death, right? Why are we not being able to change what we measure, because we know that that generates incentives at the school level, right? What is the teacher going to teach to? What is the principal going to hold teacher accountable for? What do we care about as a system? All comes down to the data that we're seeing. Why aren't we being able to change what assessments measure and how often we get and use that data, right? And so I think that would be my second thing. The third thing you lifted already, I think we have to look at devolution within education. And again, it's a very big tough thing, but I would say, something that we need to think about. And the third thing I would say, and of course this is, I carry my own like biased perspective here of how I've read the education system in the last few years, but I think that we need the governments to think seriously about investing in the pipeline of people who will run their education systems in the long run. We need to think about who runs education systems, right? We need to think about that question, and we need to be able to nurture a pipeline of people to do that work, because this is not generalist work, right? It's not work that you can bring in anybody from anywhere in the world and just put on this task and say, go at it, and they're going to be able to be successful. You need people who understand contextual realities, who understand what kids need, who understand the political barriers that come in the way of driving change, and who are intelligent and have technical abilities to move things forward. Where are we going to get those people to run our systems, right? We need to think about that in a really serious way. So those would be the 4 things that I say we prioritize.
I want to echo and underline that last point on the pipeline, right? And reminded me of like my first job in 2011 after undergrad was at Deloitte, and we did the all hands analyst training in Florida. 200 something of us, and a bunch of partners came down from all of the cities they worked in and took out 3 days to meet us, engage with us, but more importantly, train us. And we had this one senior partner who sort of was giving a keynote remark, and he said that, many of you would be wondering how awesome it is for a partner to take out, this amount of time when their billing rate is $1,500 an hour or whatever, and use this to just meet fresh undergrad, college kids that just came out and now are working. And he's like, I'm not doing it for the good of my heart. I'm doing it because I'm a very selfish person, and I'm a very selfish person in the sense that there are 200 something of you, out of which data tells me that at least five of you will go on to be partners at this firm. And he's like, I'm here to identify and nurture and encourage those five of you to get on that path. Because if I don't, I can't retire in peace, because this is a partnership. And the only way out for me is to have five partners in my bench who can take over my equity and take this organization to the next level. Otherwise, we all collectively fail. And I think that's a very important part of the pipeline that never gets discussed, is like, who are the people that will be Pakistan's education experts, who will run the entire system, this complicated system that needs reform, that has immense diversity and insane levels of scale, right? It's like 120 million people plus below the age of 30. It's massive. And for
Yeah.
that, you need an army of capable people, and we just don't never talk about the pipeline of people who will run things in country. Everything from engineers and civil engineers and water experts down to the local teachers who will train and upskill the next generation. So I wanted to echo that. Before I let you go, I always, this question I always ask my guests: what are two or three books you would recommend to the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many things come to mind. I'm going to try and give you a not a very nerdy answer. I think I'm going to try and think about what is the book that I guess yeah, I think the most obvious answer to this is like the book that is most shaped, meant the most to me, honestly. It's played the greatest role in helping me find a way to understand the world and think about what role I would like to play in it, and what does reimagining the world look like. And I think that's the Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And he's now dead and gone. This brilliant educationist, left leaning, of course. But I think the core ideas that resonate with me so much is it's just he talks about a different way to think about power का क्या रोल है, एंड किसके पास ताकत है जो कि उस ताकत का इस्तेमाल करके किसी और को ऑप्रेस कर रहा है इस वक्त, और कौन ऑप्रेस्ड है जिसके पास ताकत नहीं है. But then he puts together this picture of what change could look like, and it's so beautiful because one of the things that he says is that हमने सिर्फ ये नहीं करना कि हमने जो आज ताकतवर नहीं है उसको उसको ताकतवर बना दो, और जो आज ताकतवर है उसको कमजोर कर दो. हमने ये नहीं करना, ये सिर्फ फ्लिप करने के लिए नहीं बैठे हम सिस्टम्स को जब तब्दील करने की बात होती है. जो इंसान जब ताकत में आए उसको जरूरी है कि वो फंडामेंटली डिफरेंट तरीके से ऑपरेट करे, because otherwise you will just continue to replicate the same cycles of oppression that you've seen happening over the past many centuries, right? And if I when I step back and I study the histories of countries across the world, right, in which you've even had revolutions, you've had people who were previously among the oppressed come in power, they've often replicated those same cycles of injustice. And I think that to me is very central, because injustice इस मुल्क के अंदर हमारी रियलिटी बन गई है, हमारी सोसाइटी सेटअप है, उसकी फाउंडेशन ही इंजस्टिस के ऊपर सेटअप है. एंड सो आई थिंक दैट बुक मीन्स अ लॉट टू मी, बिकॉज इट हेल्प्स मी थिंक अबाउट कि अगर हमने अपने मुल्क को जेन्युइनली एक डिफरेंट डायरेक्शन में लेके जाना है, एक ज़्यादा खुशहाल, हैप्पी, फेयर, जस्ट सोसाइटी को इस्टेब्लिश करना है, तो हमें अंडरस्टैंड करना पड़ेगा कि ताकत का क्या रोल है, राइट, और हम ताकत को रिइमेजिन कर सकें. सो sorry, I go on a rant about Paulo
No,
Freire.
this is a very, I mean, as you were explaining this, I'm going to buy this book because, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about, what country in the world represents what you were describing. And South Africa came to my mind. not only because of their experience with apartheid and oppression as a people, the majority of the country as a people, but what they did out of that experience to begin the process. I would never say that they've achieved that process, but to begin that process of reimagining what power ought to be like and what power should wield and not wield. And we're seeing this today. I thought of South Africa because the South African foreign minister has been in town here in Washington, given everything that's going on in Gaza and Palestine. And she gave a very powerful interview to Mehdi Hassan, which, if you haven't seen, I would encourage you and all the audience to go watch, because she got into this conversation that, we refuse to be the country that, watches this happen and not do or say anything about it, primarily because of our experience. And our experience has forced us to have a posture in the world, both internally and externally, that is fundamentally at odds with what power represents historically. So I was thinking, in my mind, I haven't read the book, but as you were explaining what the book is about, that South Africa, perhaps I would put it at the top end of the reimagining what power should be doing level.
I haven't seen the interview. That sounds really cool, but I'll Google it after our chat. Thank you for pointing that out. And that sounds amazing. I want to hear that talk.
Yeah.
And I guess from that, the Nelson Mandela's own biography, I guess, is also a really, really powerful thing to read and I guess explore and contrast with one's own life and reflect on. Thank you for that example. I'm going to remember South Africa in
Yeah,
relation
no,
to.
and I mean, the Mandela's own thing, right? I mean, I often think about that experience of like what kind of intellect it takes for a man to reject revenge after all that happened, and to stand with his oppressors and basically say, I forgive you, and let's work together to build a better future, and not seek revenge. I think
Yeah.
in the modern era, I don't think anybody comes close to showcasing that level of sort of far-reaching thought and understanding and empathy, despite everything that happened to him. So yeah, I think his biography is a must read as well. Again, thank you so much for your time, for the work that you do, and really awesome chatting with you. Good luck with everything. Good luck with scaling this program. And for those of you who are listening and are interested in applying to the program, I have put the links in the description below as well. So please do check it out. And again, maybe we'll chat, when this new cohort starts, and maybe have some of the fellows on the podcast to share their experiences, Khadija, as well. So I'll ping you about that in the near future. But in the meantime, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Uzair. Yes, they will be far more interesting than me to talk to also. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.